As Jenny said, the focus of our discussion in this session is around social sciences and planetary health. And I think we're going to have a really lively discussion. What I propose that we do, we'll have 10-minute presentations from our speakers in sequence. And then I propose that we just have a 5-minute well-being break, just so we can stretch, because that'll be about an hour into the session. And then we can come back for initially a panel discussion and then open things up to other participants. What I'd like to do is I'll say a few words, I guess, building on Jenny's opening remarks about my perspective. I'm a public health physician, and how I think about the importance of the social sciences in this context. And then I'd like to introduce our speakers, and then I'll throw to them in sequence. I think it's fair to say that at this stage in the evolution of the field of planetary health, there's a strong focus on the natural sciences, epidemiology, and other health sciences. Importantly, though, the central challenge in planetary health is human culture. Our dominant culture, and indeed our dominant economic paradigm, is the biggest of the planetary health challenges. As human ecologist Stephen Boyden has noted, while that dominant culture is the biggest challenge, human culture is our only hope. Changing our culture is, if you like, the way forward as we all strive together for planetary health. And it follows from that social science and humanities are critical to us making progress on planetary health. So let me introduce our speakers for today's session. Firstly, we'll hear from Sam Bickersteth. Sam, you might like to just give a wave and say hello, because if you put your speaker on just to say hello, you'll come up strongly.
Yeah, hi Tony, and hi everybody. Fantastic to join you this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are.
Thanks very much, Sam. So Sam is the CEO of Opportunity International UK, an economist. Sam has worked on food security, rural livelihoods, and climate change challenges across Africa, Asia, and Latin America for 30 years. He's led international development teams for Oxford University, PwC, DFID, and Oxfam. He was the CE of the Climate and Development Knowledge Network until 2018, and most recently, Executive Director of the Rockefeller Foundation Economic Council on Planetary Health at Oxford Martin School. So welcome, Sam. Next, Zoe Rosa. Zoe, would you like to say hello as well?
Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me.
Great, thank you, Zoe. So Zoe is the director of the Institut Bon Pasteur in Mauritius, where she creates products and services in education and geographic medicine. Zoe's focus is ecological, artistic, and technological approaches to planetary health in service of human well-being. Everything Zoe has done, individually or with partners, has been for the improvement of ecologically productive environments in urban and rural contexts, empowered by education for well-being. Zoe's core themes are human habitat, health, and education, and Notably, the Institute's values are joy, health, and prosperity. I really hope that we discuss that further as we go. So welcome to you as well. Our next speaker is Enuis Trinidade. Please say hello, Enuis.
Hello for everybody. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. I'm professor of the University of São Paulo, and I work with the specialty of advertising, and I will speak about consumption habits and marketing and communication influence in the context of planetary health.
Thanks very much, Enuis. So Enuis has a PhD in communication sciences from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, where, as he said, he's now a full professor in the USP School of Communication and Arts. From 2010 to 2015, Enuis was the president of the Brazilian Association of Researchers in Advertising. He is vice leader of the study group in semiotics, communication, culture, and consumption, and a member of the research group for studies in aesthetics. Enuis focuses on themes including aesthetics and consumption, production of meaning in publicity and advertising, studies of enunciation, and reception in advertising languages and consumption practices. Welcome, Enuis.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Padma Venkat. Please say hello, Padma.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Wonderful.
Nice to meet all of you, and thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful to have you with us, Padma. It's a particular delight for me to see you again when we met some years ago. Yeah. Padma Venkat is Dean of the Division of Public Health in the School of Public Health at the SRM Institute of Science and Technology in Chennai, India. Padma has a PhD from Queen's College, Cambridge, and Master of Health Leadership from McGill University in Montreal. Her fields include microbiology, biochemistry, phytochemistry, Ayurveda, and public health. She focuses on translational research and innovations for affordable and sustainable healthcare, safe drinking water, nutrition and wellness, maternal and child health, always leveraging local knowledge and resources. Welcome, Padma.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you.
And Padma, our thoughts are with you and your family and your friends and colleagues in India, of course, in these very challenging times for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And after Padma, our next speakers will have a paired presentation from Catherine Zivert and Steve Quilley from University of Waterloo in Canada. So I'll introduce Catherine first. Catherine, would you like to say hello? I wonder if Morgan is still with you there at the moment.
Yes. We've moved to another spot in the house. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here this morning.
And wonderful to see Morgan so attentive there. Mm-hmm. So Catherine is a PhD student in the School of Environment, Resources and Sustainability at the University of Waterloo in Canada. Catherine works at the intersection of socio-ecological systems change and health. Her PhD research is about long-term prospects for human health and well-being on a planet in ecological crisis. Catherine believes that a benevolent transition is still possible, but also knows that it will be rife with tension, paradox, and complexity. Her dissertation tells the story of an unlikely assemblage of ideas, practices, and structures that could become the cornerstones of health systems in the Anthropocene. Welcome, Catherine. With Catherine, we have also Steve Quilley. Would you like to say hello as well, Steve?
Hello, and thank you very much for having me.
Terrific to have you with us, Steve, who is Associate Professor of Social and Environmental Innovation in the School of Environment Resources and Sustainability at University of Waterloo, the same school where Catherine is based. Trained as a sociologist, Steve has previously lectured in environmental politics and environmental sociology, with academic research interests ranging from historical sociology of Norbert Elias to the long-term dynamics of human ecology. Steve has also worked on policy-related projects relating to sustainability, urban regeneration, food systems, resilience, and social ecological innovation. Welcome, Steve, and indeed,
thank you very much.
Please welcome all of our speakers to the session. So to get us started, I'd like to throw now to Steve Bickersteth. Steve, do you have any slides that you'd like to share with us as you get underway?
Yes, I do, Tony. Let me see if this is going to work.
Yep, we can see them.
That's good. Let me see if I can make them even better. That should work. So, well, I feel rather humbled, Tony, to be on this panel with you because I'm just a very plain vanilla agricultural economist. And that sounds very dull because everyone else seems to be stepping across disciplinary boundaries. And it's an absolute pleasure to be with colleagues who seem to be doing this. I hope I've gone in that direction in my own career, and that's what drew me so much to work on planetary health economics in particular, which is where Jenny and I worked together, which is kind of the story about how we are here. So the interrelationship between environmental change and human health systems is the exciting thing here, and we are already stepping out of our disciplines. But I guess my slightly kind of basic proposal in this short presentation is to remind you that there's some underpinnings here which are quite in a way fundamental and quite basic, which is around economics. And we may hate economics and the process it derives, but we can't escape from it. So I think there are at least two reasons why economics matters for planetary health. One is that economics concerns improvements in human welfare and is thereby integrally related to and linked to our natural systems environmental change. And secondly, economics is really probably the most widely used tool for policymakers, cost-benefit analysis in particular, providing comparable metrics for understanding trade-offs in health and environmental outcomes. So we have it, but it's really important. But this slide, and you can see the acknowledgement to the planetary health Myers Frumpkin book that I contributed to. I guess I might be one of those economists in Jenny's analysis, which she shared earlier. So in this slide, which I acknowledge to Will Everson, who was my co-author in 2 chapters of the Planetary Health book, just shows how the relationship between economy and biosphere has changed over the last 200 years. We get this, but this is a graphic representation. And for those who've been following this conference, the extraordinary shifts in human welfare that have occurred in this period cannot be underestimated. The number of people who've come out of poverty, the decline in the proportion of people in extreme poverty, the advances in literacy, life expectancy, and so on. So in short, sustained economic growth has transformed the lives of billions of people. But as we all know, and this is why we're gathered here, we now know at the cost of widespread environmental degradation. Agriculture and land use change in particular, energy production and consumption have brought health benefits through economic growth, but they've also been the 2 biggest drivers of environmental damage. So here we know that in a way that we've got the balance wrong, as these damages are impacting human health and well-being and these very improvements. And I'd like to sort of jump to the work of Kate Raworth just briefly here, because I'm kind of jumping ahead through economists to donut economics. And Kate spends a lot of time demolishing economics in her book, but it is called donut economics. And I think that the strength of this visual and her proposition is that we're trying to find a space where the ecological ceiling and the social foundation can match and map together. And economics, which it really exists in very much in part in the light green, is right in the middle of that. So how can economics be part of the solution, not the problem, help us sort of redefine or define this inner green ring between planetary boundaries which we're hitting and the need for social foundations. And many of you will be familiar with the analysis, country by country analysis of donut economics, of the donut model, which show that, you know, in almost all cases, countries are breaching either the social thresholds or the biophysical threshold. So nowhere's got this right. So what does economics offer? And here you're going to sigh when you see this, but perhaps we shouldn't sigh. Maybe we should say, well, actually, that's the starting point. The most familiar diagram in economics is the demand and supply curve. And it's idealized. It's an idealized economic equilibrium in which the price and quantity are reached where supply and demand intersect at point P and Q. And here the markets are expected to reflect scarcity and the value of inputs used in productions and set boundaries for the use of natural assets and constrain environmental degradation. But this rarely happens. And of course, that's to do with externalities. And externalities is the sort of the big word that cuts through planetary health economics, really. It's the consequences of economic activity and cost imposed on third parties, not reflect on market prices. This is very familiar to all of you. I think what planetary health helps us to do is to think about the convergence of this across both health and environment. Intensive beef production seems to me a really great place to imagine what this looks like, driving deforestation and also negative health impacts. Policies to reduce beef consumption need to deal with imperfect information and poor eating habits. Eunice from Brazil may have some comments on this, and on the environment and on the land use and pollution impacts. So it cuts across. But we can quite quickly use the idealized situation to start to capture the social and environmental costs and externalities by shifting the supply curve, and you visualize this quite quickly, and the shaded area starts to become the cost of externality, and we can capture that through non-market valuation techniques. And this is essentially what environmental and health economists are doing. Cost-benefit analysis is the key tool for economists, for economic policy making, and the underlying impact assessments to guide policies and the trade-offs there. And essentially, it's CBA, cost-benefit analysis, whatever we call it, is seeking to capture the harder to assess health and environmental costs and benefits beyond what the market can say. And non-market valuation methods, revealed preference methods, sometimes called willingness to pay, or stated preference or value transfer. Those are three of the methods that are often used in those, and in a way standard practice in appraisal of public expenditure. Alongside the issue of externalities is how to deal with public goods. And I suppose I could have said at the beginning, although I might come into this as an economist, I think I come to this question of planetary health as a political economist also. And it seems very hard to distance ourselves from issues of politics, political economy and governance when we talk about planetary health, given the trade-offs necessary. And it's the proximity of the public goods issue together with externalities that makes this challenging. The idea of non-rival or non-excludable resources basically not being well served by market valuation, and the debate around the tragedy of the commons and how to manage that, and the need for effective governance mechanisms. But we shouldn't forget that effective mechanisms of coordination and cooperation that underpins a planetary health governance, I would say, are feasible. We've seen that with smallpox eradication. We've seen this in the Montreal Protocol, in ozone depletion management, and most recently, I think we could definitely say we've seen this in COVID vaccine research and the incredible global public response to that. Now, there are lots of problems in economics in terms of capturing value. The choice of discount rates, we love it, and politicians use it. GDP, whether it captures value. We could go into discussions of that, but I think I just want to spend the last few minutes thinking about.
Sam, pretty well time's up for 10 minutes, so
okay.
If you could truncate it a bit, that'd be great.
I will truncate. Sorry to have forgotten my clock in my enthusiasm for economics. So capital's approach, familiar to many of you, the multi-capitals approach, and natural capital, taken forward in one sense, some time ago by the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in capturing the concept of ecosystem services, the provisioning, supporting, regulating, and cultural services to provide value. And I find this the following figure, which is produced by Ian Bateman and Professor Mace on the Natural Capital Framework, a useful summary to capture the value of capitals, the services they provide, and start to quantify, so that in the bottom right hand corner we start to bring together the health and the environmental costs and benefits, and we can use that to inform policy. So I won't say any more, but just to sort of conclude that lots of this is happening. It's embedded into the private sector increasingly with the natural capital coalition and many actors taking that on board in terms of valuing the assets and informed decision makers. The UK's Green Book, which is the allocation by the Treasury of funds for public investment, incorporates ecosystem services and natural capital stock valuation. So there are many countries that are taking this forward, but do they bring the health part in this too? And I think that's really where planetary health economics comes together. An integrated assessment of the environmental and health benefits can be undertaken, and it can make implicit the values in a more explicit way. And it may redefine options and compensate losers. Thank you, Tony.
Great. Thanks very much, Sam. That's a great way to open things up. So let me move now. If you can stop sharing, Sam, we'll move across to Zoe. And just reminding people that Zoe directs the Institute Bon Pasteur in Mauritius. Over to you, Zoe.
Thank you. I think because my internet is slipping in and out, so this is why you're seeing me check around. I was wondering if Jenny could just share the presentation.
Yeah, I will. And
Thank you.
Once I start to play, it should swap over to me, so hopefully.
I thank the organisers for today. The field of applied social research, also known as social engineering, considers
Is that not working?
management of human beings in accordance with
we can't see the video
society by whomever decided what their place and function in society should.
So the video isn't playing. Sorry, but can you hear the sound?
Yeah, I can hear the sound, but I was wondering, do you have a shared screen option?
I haven't got the video, unfortunately. The video won't show on my laptop. So
okay, let me try. I'm sorry for this delay.
That's all right. Take your time, Zoe, that's okay.
Panic. Let me see, how do I do this?
Yeah, if you can put your slides up, I think I can then put the sound over the top of it.
Yes, let me, I just need to get the share screen. Sorry for my mess.
So it's my incompetence with the IT as well, don't worry.
Oh gosh. Now I'm all panicked because I don't, no, I'll just go into here. Typical.
That's all right. Zoe, would you like us to move to Annuus and then we could come back to you, because that would be fine as well. It's up
Then
to you.
if you want to save the time, because then it's just easier.
If you'd like to just
Yes,
get a little
easier.
organized, why don't we come back to you? We'll ask, are you able to stop sharing on the
Yes.
main screen, Zoe?
Yeah.
And we'll ask Annuus if he will move into his presentation, just reminding you that Annuus is from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. Over to you, Annuus.
Thank you so much. My reflections is about consumer habits, marketing, and sustainability. And I'm professor of School of Communication and Arts in the specialty of advertising. So my main proposition will discuss about consumption rituals for planetary health, and some examples. The idea of this reflection is to show that consumption serves to think about societies and rethinking their directions. In the logic of planetary health, consumption must be sustainable and cannot be a counterpart to a positioning only of the consumer as an individual, but it must also be of the productive sectors that shape the consumption of individuals. Consumption in planetary health must be ritualized and communicating its values and meanings. The shift from consumption to planetary health, in addition to practice, needs to be perceived, felt, and appropriated within a new configuration of values. Communication and consumer practice together can provide lights for this journey. Grant McCracken says that consumption rituals operate in the transfer of meanings from culturally constituted world to goods, and from goods to the meanings of people's lives. Something already perceived by Douglas and Ashwood in 1969, in Baudrillard 1963. Things mean something. Consumer rituals dramatize, create spectacularization of the routine, transforming the meanings of everyday life in mini rites of passage, in which drama regulation of the uses of things in cultures take on meanings. We must add value to brands within the precepts of fair and sustainable economies. Then we realized the importance of the consumption rituals communicate in marketing communications. In this proposition, the promotion of the institutionalization of consumption, of communication of brands and organizations for consumption that dramatize values and practices of the fair economy and sustainable production process in their advertising scenarios to create a broad planetary health mentality based on practice is advocated. Consumption of things establishing links of the meaning between brands and consumers in accordance with the precepts of planetary health. It would be a kind of education for consumption that only communication could operate in all sectors of material life. I studied particularly food apps for consumption and the experience of food apps in alternative form for consumption. The first example that I brought to you is the Resto Paris The genesis of the project COP Cycle, Eco Table, and Oval join force to offer Parisian restaurants an alternative and fair trade platform, Stop Point Paris. This platform, supported by the Paris City Council, allows any eco-responsible restaurant to offer its healthy and sustainable offer on click and collect or delivery to Parisian consumers. After health crises that affected the caring sector, Resto Point Paris created a fair model with a fair distribution of added value and offers a socially and environmentally virtuous alternative to delivery platform. At the same time, it simplifies turnkey access the restaurant owners to a new way of feeding Parisians. The other example is Sebrae. Sebrae, it's an a private organization to guide small and medium entrepreneurs. 5 suggestions for sustainable business trends for small and medium entrepreneurs. Organic product canning factory, ecological pack factory, carbon neutral event organizing, production of biofuels, natural restaurants. Sebrae explains to interested parties the market of this business and the investment needed to start the business. It's an experience to create new form of business according to the precepts of planetary health. My main conclusions are, the promotion and institutionalization of business in accordance with the principles of planetary health only gain meaning if they are mediatized by the communication and market of the brands. Representations of consumption rituals in advertising and the other communications in marketing must promote and fetishize the hits of planetary health in everyday life, as taught by Chilean historical episode No, that valid the advertising campaign of the referendum, the non-continuity of Pinochet's military regime. This is the way that communication can promote the precepts of planetary health in everyday life. We must show the precepts of planetary health in a kind of seduction to people that can create leaking sense, who can make people perceive the importance and create an attraction to the values about planetary health. Well, thank you so much. This is my main ideas for presenting according to the time to share with you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks very much, Anus. I thought that was a great finish with the seduction of planetary health. Well done.
I'd like to say that I and Marcelo, my undergraduate student, we are the responsible about the visual identity of this Congress, the annual meeting.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. We look forward to discussing that, Anus. Now, Zoe, would you like to proceed now?
Yes, I'm going to try, and we cross fingers, Jenny.
Excellent. Yeah, you get the slides. Okay. I'll start the audio. People could hear.
Well, let's just wait because I've got the video myself. Okay. I just wanted to ask the audience if they could think about free food systems while watching this presentation. And in a way, because of my abnormal academic parcours, they might feel that I am not academically diplomatic, but I have been 20 years in the field on the ground, and there are strong obstinacies that today I just can't keep silent about in any gentle way. So bear that in mind, and I apologize if anybody feels a little bit ruffled.
Thanks, Zoe. Now I can't hear the sound particularly well, Zoe. Did you check the little box to share the sound as you shared the screen?
Okay, so I'm here and I'm sharing, and yes. So tell me what I need to
if
do
you stop sharing, and then go back to share, and as you share, you should see a little box on the left before you click the share button, and that's the box to share the sound.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for guiding me through this.
No worries.
I thank the organizers for today. The field of applied social research, also known as social engineering, considers management of human beings in accordance with their place and function in society, by whomever decided what their place and function in society should be. I specialized in deconstructing, analyzing, and designing education systems and projects that geomedically, eco-socially, and economically benefit all living beings of a territory. Education systems define cultural formation, maintenance, transition, and transformation. Where archaeology and social science have allowed me to understand how politics use archaeology and education to move their vision of public and territorial resources management further, my passion for planetary health has demonstrated how there is very little space for territorial identity construction, consumer deviation, forced traffic flow, and creating tensions around the management and productizing of territorial resources, whether material or immaterial, i.e. cultural. While this can help in tourism marketing, we should remain mindful of its impact on social welfare in the long term. Experiencing life as a commodity rather than a privilege to witness beyond any measure of logic. Planetary health is a last hope for a social scientist to assist without falling into the trap of nationalist or money-first agendas. The Institute started working with Resilient Solutions based in Western Australia, defining a joint venture called the Geomedical Rescue Service, focused on land and community regeneration strategies for planetary health, socioeconomic and ecological approaches that empowers communities with autonomy, generating the side effects of joy, health, and prosperity defined by geomedical parameters. These parameters are improving and maintaining the biological, chemical, and geological parameters of air, water, and soil and access to sunlight, together with technological approaches that keep pollution from seeping into shared spaces. This is a design brief that maintains the condition necessary for life on Earth as we know it in all good health. There are 2 points we always come across and involved parties fail to understand beyond their personal agendas. 1, revenge can never be part of a peace plan. There is no I touch you last or I'm going to dominate you possible in planetary health territorial claims. 2, when devising a territorial strategy for planetary health, we don't need to look into personal beliefs. The science is there. We simply need to focus on the geomedical parameters of life on Earth as we know it and the technology available that would stop polluting factors in situ, transforming byproducts into usable goods through the scope of circular economy at small and finite scale. As social scientists, we know that confrontations and disagreements of perspectives will always exist. As social engineers, we work with these obstinacies every day, and the Institute works with engineers, artists, medical scientists, and business consultants who have a specialization in obstinacy management. The list goes on, but we're only hoping to encourage others to mainstream and share this approach. I have been part of the Planetary Health Alliance since January 2018. I have participated in talks and platforms on the topic. I have co-created festivals and place-making experiences for people to become aware of their situation in this global interspecies business exchange network. Anthropocentric business is no longer possible, and planetary health is a discipline that has all the legitimacy to do something about it. Social scientists need to work with everyone to demonstrate the systemic design that can only help nations and their national health services. This is the ultimate goal, with a multitude of side effects that we do not need to list. We just need to focus on that one direct action. This could also resolve the obstinacy between money-based education systems and land-based, intuitively geomedical education systems. What blend would emerge from that? What transformation? Let's see the education pattern. To maintain or to mainstream this approach, here are the fundamental design rules applied by all the great social carers through time. These rules are 3,000 years old, and we thank those of the Sakya lineage for transmitting this knowledge through the ages. These rules are common sense to planetary health. 1. Look at yourself and others. Examine and analyze directly or indirectly if an act is beneficial for yourself and others. If so, one must do it. One must avoid any action that does no good for yourself and others. And having guilt is not correct. So if you feel guilty, don't do it. 2. Examine how much benefit and how much harm. If helping other beings might harm you a little, but help others a lot, would you regret it? If so, avoid it. It is only useful if you would have no regret in doing it. 3. Examine what type and level of beings you're trying to help. An act may be helpful to some beings but harmful to others. If forced to choose, it is better to help beings with greater potential for the common good of planetary health. 4. Examine the numbers of beings benefited or harmed. We can do acts that will help many and harm a few, but avoid actions which help a few but harm many. And this is what is plaguing all social systems and all business systems today. 5. If there are equal numbers of beneficiaries and disadvantaged beings, try to be skillful in limiting the harm. Whatever we do may have a good and bad side, so we seek to find the best balance for the common good of planetary health. 6. Examine this time and the future long term when trying to help other beings. If doing something helps both this and future times, we should do it. If it harms both, we should avoid it. If it helps this present a little bit, but harms us in the long term and future, we should avoid doing it. If harmful a little now, but helpful in the future, we should try to limit the harm in the present. 7. Examine the law and avoid breaking the law. However, if we are law-abiding but break a law in a way that is helpful for lots of beings in the long run, then it's better to do so. The law does not take planetary health into consideration. Advocacy and policy development takes too long at the current rate. Educating people that lack the awareness and who are in decision-making position can be discouraging, especially when the person is a grandiose narcissist. Overall, motivation is most important. A seemingly positive action that helps is excellent, but a lot of people are about showing off today with keeping a problem in commerce, such as the cycles of war and today the industry of sustainability. Planetary health has the responsibility of making the industry of sustainability obsolete. These jobs should not exist out of the common sense of knowing how to coexist on planet Earth. So this is what social scientists of planetary health, from my perspective and that of the institutes, can bring to the community. We're whistleblowers, researchers, systemic designers, and above all, facilitators of the standard for decision making while upholding the geomedical conditions necessary for our life on Earth in joy, health, and prosperity with all the human disagreements that might arise. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Zoe. That was a terrific presentation. It came through very clearly and as Richard says, wonderful message there. So we look forward to discussing that as we move forward into the session. So now it's time for us to hear from Padma Venkat, who, as I mentioned before, is Dean of Public Health with the SRM Institute of Science and Technology in Chennai, India. Over to you, Padma.
Thank you very much, Tony. Can I share my screen now? Can you all see it?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks, Jenny, once again for inviting me on this panel. And today I would like to share some of my learning as a health scientist, because my journey has taken me not only from science, it's taken me through design, through social science, and so on. And I have been working for the past 15 years with people who are indigenous communities and also with traditional knowledge. Traditional knowledge can contribute to solving serious global problems. This was mentioned in Article 8J of the Convention of Biodiversity. And it will be useful for conservation of natural resources, sustainable use of plants and animals, climate change, etc. But I'm in awe of the traditional health knowledge in India and also, I'm sure, other countries in the world. Not only about the principles and the practices for living well and living in harmony with nature, but also about the philosophy and the social norms which are required to sustain it. And this is a verse from one of the ancient Ayurvedic texts, which is a medical system in India, which reflects what the thought process is, the advanced thinking. The poor, those suffering from disease, and those afflicted by sorrow should be helped. Even insects and ants should be treated with compassion, just as one's own self. I'm in awe of the ecosystem-based health knowledge, the folk traditions, and also written down codified health knowledge systems of India, Ayurveda, Siddha, Unani, and others. 1200 BCE text in India mentions about the interconnectedness between the microcosm and the macrocosm. It says what is out there is within us, and we are an endless continuum. Somehow we have forgotten to stay connected with each other and with nature. And it says life on earth is all about achieving a balance. Now, what is that balance and how do we achieve that balance? Around 4,600 ethnic communities in India know the usage of 8,000 medicinal plants for their healthcare needs. And it's actually a philosophy, a way of living, which integrates several practices like yoga, cleansing methods, lifestyle changes, and also diet. And astounding verifiable concepts exist on personalized lifestyle to suit the circadian, seasonal, and regional existence. And I think this is very much relevant today for planetary health. But there is a major hurdle. The worldviews and the epistemology of traditional knowledge and modern science or biomedicine are very different. To interpret this and to contemporize it, it requires social engagement. And that's where me as a health scientist started drifting into social science. And I went beyond science and technology. I would like to just share a couple of examples of traditional knowledge translational work that my team and I from the organization which I was before, Transdisciplinary University, had done. What we did was we, of course, had to get consent from the healers or the practitioners, and we documented it. And then we had a dialogue so that we could interpret it properly in order to contemporize it. I would like to give first example, traditional knowledge for anemia. Because as you know, every other Indian woman is anemic. And this is a very major problem which is not going away. And in the ancient texts of Ayurveda, you have reference to several formulations, herbal formulations, and individual herbs, single herbs, which are used for a condition called Pandu, which can be related to anemia. And we took 11 such single herbs and we studied that to see if it has got any effect or not. This is our way of scientific interpretation. And just to give you one example, the Indian gooseberry, which is a very common fruit, which is very affordable, we found that it increases the bioavailability of iron 4 times when compared to iron sulfate control, and 2.5 times better than ascorbic acid, which is a bioavailability enhancer. Second example I would like to share is about the drinking water disinfection. As you may know, more than 500,000 children under the age of 5 die every year due to diarrhea, and this is due to drinking water contaminated with fecal pathogens, and also bad water sanitation and hygiene conditions. And traditional practice of India was to store drinking water in copper pots. Of course, those days it used to be widespread, and it is not so these days. And it was believed that drinking that water would impart health benefits. The classical texts such as Sushruta Samhita, which is around the 6th century BCE, also has reference to this. It says one should consume water stored in vessels of gold, silver, copper, bronze, and crystals, also in earthenware by adding fragrant flowers. Because we could not afford to do laboratory tests in gold pots, we chose the copper pots. And this is the scientific interpretation. We contaminated the water with diarrhea-causing pathogens, right from Vibrio cholerae to rotavirus, and stored the water. And when we tested it, all of the pathogens had got killed. But the pots can be expensive for a poor household. So we came up with a device which is very simple, and it's low cost, and it is equally effective. And this is where the design is also very important. We had to discuss with people who are familiar with that. And also we had to choose designs which are anthropocentric. It's for the right reasons I use this word. And it is called Thamaras. This product is manufactured and it is affordable. There are no recurring expenses. So it's a once in a lifetime purchase, and it is lab and field tested, sustainable point of use interventions that can be used at the household level. So friends, I feel that learning is dynamic and multidimensional, and knowledge can come from anywhere. And it is said in the indigenous communities that there is constant interaction between the universe, biodiversity, planet, indigenous communities, and also us, the modern societies. I feel there are 3 essential impact levers which are important for planetary health. Of course, we have the science and technology, which does the work and pushes it forward, an enterprise which scales it up and takes it on. But the most important thing is the social aspect, because the mind decides whether we are going to adopt it or not. So the behavior change is the most challenging lever, I feel. And I would like to leave you all with this question. Can traditional knowledge be explored for planetary health, or will it remain marginalized because we don't understand it? Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Padma. That's a very clear presentation as well, and a great final message there. I think a good provocation for the discussion. So this brings us to the final presentations from the University of Waterloo in Canada. And here I think we have a paired presentation from Catherine Zivert and Steve Quilley, who are both at the School of Environment Resources and sustainability at Waterloo. So perhaps over to Catherine. I'm not sure whether Morgan's still with you, Catherine, or if Steve is starting off, but I'll leave it with you guys.
Great,
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, Steve, you can start.
Okay, and then Morgan can take over. Thank you very much for having us, everyone. I should say Catherine is very, these are Catherine's slides, you can tell because they're beautiful. She's put me first. I'm definitely not, Catherine's doing all the heavy lifting on this project, and I'm really a kind of bit part to it. So we're going to be talking about a social and ecological systems perspective. Very quickly, oh, Catherine, could you go on to the next slide? Sorry. This project, very briefly, this project came out of a sort of the interface between ecological economics, historical sociology, which is where I'm coming from, and the process of state formation and modernization, and social innovation. I first met Catherine on a social innovation diploma that she was doing, and I was pulled in to do some teaching on, run by Francis Westley. The point where we start is the political economy of state formation and modernization, at least for me. Stephen at the beginning talked about the enormous advances that have taken place in terms of human health and well-being over the last 200 years. And I think it's worth starting out with that. The default position of agricultural humanity is grinding poverty. And the systems which have allowed hundreds of millions of people, but also the population to grow, hundreds of millions of people to come out of that, really have depended on a form of economy which developed in tandem with the state and the market. And this is a diagram which kind of just summarizes what modern societies look like. The traditional domain of livelihood, domestic, household-based forms of subsistence and mutual care have given way to a situation of where mobile, especially in socially mobile individuals, are absolutely dependent. Their survival unit, their survival depends on the nation state through various systems and access to the market. And our left-right political systems, the political spectrum, is really just a reflection of this sort of binary, this spectrum between the market and the state. And what's common to both sides of that is the situation of very fragmented, atomized individuals. That individualism, which is aggregated in collectivist forms by the state, or in market sort of forms, the aggregation of market preferences. That individualism underlies many, many cherished goods in our society, relating to liberal democracy, human rights, and various forms of social emancipation. And it comes, as we're beginning to see, at the cost of a real tension between the biosphere and the economy. Could you go on to the next one, Catherine? So this is our image of what a state market society, which has been leavened or rebalanced in an era of biophysical limits to growth by the re-emergence of livelihood. And the premise is really that if through financial crisis or economic limits to growth, the scope of, if the economy contracts, if we're in a period of degrowth, whether intentional because of the kind of policies that people are talking about here, or unintentional because of financial crisis and catastrophe, if the economy shrinks, necessarily the scope of the polity shrinks because there's not enough tax revenue to do the kind of things that we're used to doing. And that means the systems of security, health security, and other state supports for human well-being, whether it's transport infrastructure or the police or social workers or translation services for the court system or whatever it is, they also begin to shrink, and the burden has to be taken up by the domain of the informal economy, by the domain of livelihood, by the domain of the household. And for a lot of Greens, small is beautiful. That's been a kind of a target for policy, And this is where I'm going to hand over to Catherine. There's clearly enormous benefits from that vision of small is beautiful, but there are also clear dangers, because the more we go towards a kind of self-sufficient localism, the more individuals become embedded in ascriptive processes of family and community and place-bound community, the more danger is that we lose that value and dignity and rights associated with the individual, which come from that, essentially from that Judeo-Christian imago Dei, which has sort of animated the process of modernization. So Catherine, I'll leave you to take over with the next slide.
Thanks, Steve. We'll see how this goes. Okay, so I'll just add that the way that my PhD is about health systems in the Anthropocene, and I am looking at initiatives that can do the kinds of things that Steve was talking about, so that can root our health and care activities within the sphere of livelihood, and that can kind of take that pressure off of formal health and care systems as the economy contracts and we move into a space that is not only more sustainable and better for planetary health, but that could create a lot of challenges for well-being during the transition or the phase of contraction. And this is a heuristic from complexity science that we use to think about how the dominant regime might shift into an alternative modernity. And so our idea is that if we look at these prefigurative alternatives and help to provide momentum around them, that this can ease the transition into a more desirable alternative modernity where we can maintain some of the things about modern society that we've really come to cherish, while also recognizing that some things we're going to probably have to let go of or change. Thank you. I'm getting fed at the same time.
It's a brilliant solution.
So these are some of the initiatives that I've looked at, and I'll just highlight one to give an example of the kinds of commitments that Steve was talking about, and that's the family foster care model for mental health in Giel, Belgium, which you've likely heard about. It's a 700-year-old tradition where people invite individuals who have serious mental health issues like schizophrenia or often long-term developmental disabilities into their home to become part of their family. And so families make an intergenerational commitment often, or at least have people in their homes for decades, quite frequently. And you can see that this is a fantastic model from the perspective of human and planetary health. It's rooted in dignity, it's extremely effective, it's has a really low economic cost for the state. It's much cheaper than other forms of either hospital-based care or even community care. And it also is highly non-medicalized. So there isn't really a treatment regimen that people are expected to follow. They're just meant to live within ordinary community networks and family networks. And that's where the benefits of the model are really felt, where that model shines. But you can imagine that the decision, what are you doing? The decision to welcome someone with serious mental illness into your home would not be an easy one, and would require sacrifices throughout the family's life. And so that's the kind of tension that we're thinking about, is as networks of care become more rooted in households and in communities, that people are going to, have obligations that that they won't be able to step aside from. They'll be more place-based, which clearly generates benefits for planetary health, but also limits individual freedom in certain ways. And so I think that's probably all I can fit in before.
Perhaps I could add one last caveat to. Have we got time, Tony?
Yeah, you can have another minute. Yeah.
Another minute. Is that okay, Catherine? Okay. The last caveat is that if, to the extent that we're moving away from a global society of individuals, and we could think about that might involve renationalization of some aspects of economic life, And then from a move from further, it's kind of a radical subsidiarity from the national to local and regional scales, and from, to some extent, from the formal economy to the informal economy. As you're moving in that direction, one of the things that will inevitably come up is the locus of mutual identification. And I know in a context like this, people will tend to be coming from a kind of a broadly liberal stroke left, stroke green kind of political orientation. And I think one thing to bear in mind is just how much of the things that we cherish and that most people would want to preserve, health services, transport infrastructure, depend on a level of mutual identification which allows fiscal transfer. So if you're wanting people to take a hit in terms of material consumption for the common good, that requires a certain amount of not just identification with each other. People have talked about identification with the biosphere, with non-human nature, and those processes of identification are, well, put it this way, they're not achieved lightly. Once you have them, you need to hang on to them, and historically, they're achieved through, you know, violence and monopolies established by the state. So it's just a note of caution about the structures of identification which allow certain kinds of redistribution, and we should just be wary about being too cavalier that these can come about simply through education or showing people that it's the right thing to do, or one thing which is absolutely guaranteed, which is that if we move into any great moment of transition, then those processes of mutual identification will become much less rational and much more chaotic and potentially conflictual and violent. And I think we're seeing that all over the world at the moment, which means that,
Right.
yeah, I'll leave it there.
No, perhaps we can pick that up in the discussion, Steve, as we go forward. But that's thanks to all of you, Catherine and Morgan and Steve, for that. What I suggest we do now is we take just a few minutes for everybody to have a well-being stretch break, and if we come back at the top of the hour in about 4 minutes to open up the panel discussion in the first instance, and then the wider discussion with other participants. So think about your questions, and including among the panelists, but also questions from wider participants as we proceed. So let's take a few minutes to the top of the hour. Thank you. Great. Well, I can see people coming back. Well, what a wonderful array of presentations we've had there. Thank you once again, Jenny, for curating the session in such a wonderful way. A diversity of perspectives from social science disciplines as well as from regions of the world. A marvelous opportunity for us now. So I think we've got 15 minutes or so for some discussion among panelists, and then we open it up from there to everybody that's with us today. Jenny, do you have anything you'd like to open up with?
Yeah, the one thing I would just say is how nice it is to see how many people are here. Obviously, the rest of you can't see, but there are about 46 people in the audience. So it's always a little bit nervous kind of when you put these things online, whether anybody will come. And if not, the panelists would have had a very nice discussion amongst ourselves. But I will, at the end, I'll put my email in. And obviously, it would be lovely to stay in touch with all of you. There isn't an easy way to do it. It would be lovely to know which of you are social scientists who want to say how much social science can add to planetary health, and how many of you are scientists who've come to see what social science can offer. If perhaps people could just put into the chat, who they are and their discipline, and why they came to this, that would actually be really useful. And I'll collate those together, probably not before the end of this session, but certainly when we come to have any kind of write-up of it afterwards. But thank you very much, Tony, for taking this on. I couldn't have coped with trying to do the technical side of it and sharing at the same time. So I'm very, very grateful for you for taking that part on. Thanks.
No, my pleasure, Jenny. Well, perhaps I might just open things up. I encourage the other panelists as well, if you've got questions, to feel free to jump in. But I wondered, Padma, if you would like to open things up, and others might join in with this important question of Indigenous ways of knowing about the world, local knowledge systems, so fundamentally important, but often I think in the discourse, not just of planetary health, but in society more generally, it tends to be confined to the history books, because we tend to focus on the modern and have, in a sense, techno-optimism about the future. I just wonder if you'd like to open things up, but other panelists might like to put their hand up as well if they'd like to speak to this important set of questions.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Tony. I feel there is a need for integrating Indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge, especially for planetary health, because there was a way of living with nature which existed before the pre-modern times. So I think it will be important for us to know what it was, at least know what it was. And many people, many tribals and so on, still follow in the same way. They live in the forests, and including in India, there are tribes who live in the forests and they know how to live with nature, and they live peacefully with it. So there are sustainable ways in which they are doing it, and it's probably good for us to know the wisdom behind that. And I think there are ways in which we can contemporize it. And also, I would like to think that this knowledge may be local, it may not be global. So what is available in one place may not be available in another place, but there are principles which can be followed everywhere.
Well, thank you very much, Padma. I wonder, Catherine, from the Canadian perspective, where does Indigenous knowledge feature in the work that you're doing? some of my Canadian colleagues very interested in a Canadian context.
Yes, and I would say that I don't have any really strong connections into Indigenous communities, so it hasn't informed my work in a really contextual and specific way. But there's certainly a huge amount of overlap between the kinds of strategies that I'm looking at and Indigenous perspectives in the Canadian context. You see that a lot in the regenerative movements around land use and conservation and health and returning those kind of Indigenous perspectives on, you know, okay, on the medicines of the land and how to steward the land. So I think there's huge overlap and so much to be learned there.
Thanks so very much, Catherine. Steve, I can see your hand up, and then back to Jenny. Yeah. Oh, no, we can't hear you, Steve. Maybe your mic.
My mic, sorry. I'm going to be very unpopular and just sound a note of sociological skepticism. Not, and this is, I mean, I'm not Canadian. I came in 2012. I think, I mean, the first thing is that the kind of Indigenous knowledge that I think Padma is talking about is it's essentially hunter-gatherer stroke very small-scale horticulturalists. I mean, if you look for 10,000 years, the history of human beings really since fire is just incredibly disruptive at every single scale. I don't really think there was a period where human beings who have language and culture were not on a trajectory of disturbance. I think that the continuity, I see much more continuity over the last 100,000 years than I see disruption. There wasn't an agricultural revolution. There was a very slow process of agrarianization, which really emerged just from the fact that you've got a creature that is able to build models of the world and faced with certain kinds of ecological constraints can sidestep them. That's the first thing. And the second, that the kind of participating consciousness, Owen Barfield describes this really, really well, and Maurice Berman is another one, which I think you'd associate with certainly that period in human history, and those people and cultures who are still practicing that is automatically disrupted by something like writing or literacy or engagement with the modern world. As soon as you start doing that, you're in a kind of different world. And from the outside, my sense with the position of First Nations in Canada is that they tend, especially in the north, to be caught in a permanent state of dependency because they're kind of a tribal land-based form of life and consciousness just doesn't go with a individual citizen-based kind of modern state. And if you were to sort of step back, then there's a whole bunch of things which go with that form of life which we absolutely wouldn't accept now. So, you know, yeah.
Reflections, Steve. I guess one thing that I'd say in response to that is that there's questions around Indigenous practices, as you point out, and but there's also questions around mindset and you know, frankly, understanding that people are part of nature. You know, this is a pretty fundamental point that Western dominant culture denies, frankly. So I think, you know, at the very least, we can learn a planetary consciousness from Indigenous peoples, and that would get us, if you like, to first base in planetary health. So, you know, that's just a bit of a counterpoint there. But I can see Jenny's got her hand up as well.
It was just
and then Zoe as well.
Yeah, it was just kind of a reflection on that, on some of the things that we came across when we were going through the ethics process for planetary health. Because when we had a focus group that basically we ran everywhere we could at kind of different countries. And it was interesting when we ran it in Global South countries, one of the things that came up quite strongly was that we needed to be mindful of being kind of spending too much time, I suppose, lionizing some of the traditional knowledges in a way that prevented the country from developing. And that we have to be very mindful of making sure that these go side by side. And this has been, it's been kind of in the forefront of my mind with the work I'm doing at the moment in Assam in India, where we have farmers who use traditional remedies, but they actually know that the pharmaceutical drugs will probably work better and will work quicker. And so we have to be very careful of how we move forward with those traditional knowledges and the more modern systems together. And I think sometimes we can lose sight of that in planetary health. And I think sometimes we can lose sight of the fact that this in itself, organic food comes with a cost. Being able to have land comes with a cost that actually not everybody can have. And you can, as I think it's important in some presentations, end up potentially trapping some communities in poverty and dependency by overriding some of those from both sides. And I think that is what's interesting. And I remember when I was in Waterloo with Steve and Catherine, we talked about things like whether eco-villages are scalable to the world. And if they're not, what is then the middle ground that we need to find? And I think that's something, again, as social scientists and the cultural side, I think is a really valuable angle to this that we can start to unpack. Where does traditional knowledge and development intersect in the way that's best to everybody? And that goes with the big infrastructure, the health systems that need doctors and they need research and technology and they need bioprospecting, but that also doesn't destroy the planet at the same time and values the traditional knowledge alongside the modern. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is, which is partly why I think discussions like this are necessary, but I think it's definitely a part of this discussion I would certainly like to take forward.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Jenny. Yes, Zoe, and then
Padma. Yes. In response to Steve and what you were just saying, Jenny and Padma, in the experiences I've had, I think it always boils down to this free food system. I mean, even just looking at my region, the amount of money people spend on food every month, it's nearly all of their salary. I'd go up to 60% in certain households. When I was working on projects like Eat Your Streets or creating habitat corridors through South Manchester 10 years ago, or working with the NHS there, the idea came about that throughout our urban or rural territories, we need free food systems that act as a primary food resource for biosphere, but also humans, so that they could reduce costs, buying food, basically. Now I'm trying to test that further, but you're right in saying that the blend between the indigenous and the contemporary definition of comfort needs to be really analyzed. And one of the things I've noticed with my volunteers, because everybody comes with their own philosophy of knowledge, their own definition of what is existence, etc., is to be able to just give them the science and they can decide of their own accord in action rather than lecturing. Because the projects that do are those that actually enable the person to become critical. But I'm interested in developing those protocols further. So that was my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. Sorry, that's very helpful indeed. Perhaps we'll go to Sam and then Padma. You can round it out, this part of the conversation after a quick comment from Sam, because then we'll need to open it up to all of our other participants. So please feel free to put questions in the chat box or get ready to raise your hand and raise your questions. So let's go to Sam and then back to Padma for final remark. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony, and thank you, Padma, for your presentation. And there's so much more that we need to learn from Indigenous knowledge. But I think Zoe took us to the streets of Manchester just now, and I wanted to make the point about what does urban planetary health look like? And we need to kind of think of contextualizing this into where most people now live. So food systems is the best entry point. Incredible Edible or Eat Your Streets that you just referred to, Zoe, seem to be really important initiatives. And there's a certain amount in the lockdowns the last year where that's happened. But I think if we could get a bit stuck with traditional knowledge. I mean, economics has got something to blame for it, or neoclassical economics, by sort of taking land out of the value. There's sort of 3 factors of production, which Adam Smith started with, were very clear about land, and neoclassical economists sort of forgot land really and focused on labor and capital. And we definitely need to reclaim the land value and the natural, by which we mean the resources, the air, the water, which we may not have. So I think the agendas around food systems or greening urban space, I think if we can bring that more into the planetary health agenda, we can get some of the balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. And back to you, Padma, for some final reflections.
Thank you, everyone. I think we've come to a point where we need to have alternatives. We cannot push on as we are doing so now. So we need to know how to live with the planet. And do we have any solutions? We know planetary health is important, and we know we need to act on that. But how do we go about it? Do we have someone telling us? And I think that's where indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge can really help us, because they have already lived or they are living with nature. So a peek into that, and I'm not saying that the same persons will have to work on that, but there can be multidisciplinary teams which can be looking at this as one of the venues, and it can provide solutions not only for the rural, but also for the urban planetary health as well. For example, if you look at the individual's health, we have ourselves worked with home herbal gardens and balcony gardens, which can provide for primary health care plans. So this is one way of greening your apartments and also taking care of your health. And where did that knowledge come from? It is traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge. So if you would like to go forward in planetary health, we need to know how to live with nature. And I think we can take all the hints that we need, all the help that we can get from indigenous people and traditional knowledge. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much for that discussion. So let's open things up more widely now to other questions from other participants. Have we received any in the chat box as yet, Jenny? Would anybody?
But if people would like to put them into the chat box while putting their hand, I can pick up anybody whose hand isn't being noticed.
Or just jump in, anybody that would like to raise a question. Renato, I can see you've put something in the chat box there, but did you want to raise a question or was it more a comment, Renato? Oh, I can see a hand up there. Manuela, would you like to go?
Yes, good morning. My question is about, my concern is about, I think that the urban part and the indigenous communities are not separated. I'm Brazilian, and what happens in Brazil is that when people who come from urban areas get in touch with indigenous communities, they transfer some diseases that indigenous don't have the knowledge of how to cure them. And as long as we are deforesting, we have a great impact on indigenous communities. So I think that it's our responsibility to help them, but also we have to respect their point of view and not repeat the colonization process like we know everything and we know what's best for you. So I think it's like something interchangeable, but important to think about because we have a great impact on what happens in indigenous communities. And that's it.
Well, thank you very much, Manuela. Zoe, would you like to respond to that? You put a couple of things in the chat box.
There's a contemporary chef called Alex Atala who was trained in Europe as a chef and then went back to Brazil and opened his restaurant called Dom. And Dom works with indigenous people of the Amazonas to how to preserve the foods in a contemporary context, but more so how his style as a chef, he goes hunting for his food. He gets all the science down. He does know how to make the difference between romanticized indigenous knowledge, so the cosmological aspect of culture, and the true facts of science and the impact it has on the environment. This is a direct experience and direct local knowledge to Brazil that you could access there. He's a bit rough around the edges, but worth talking to.
Great, thank you very much, Zoe. Any other reflections from our panel of speakers in response to Manuela? Oh, Steve, please proceed.
Just very quickly, as alongside indigenous knowledge, I think that for me the issue is the materialism and the fungibility, the materialism of science, the scientific model of the universe, and the fungibility of markets. And from a sort of Polanyian perspective, what I think my impression of what you're talking about is, I would call it re-embedding economic life to a certain extent, and there are risks that go with that. But indigenous knowledge isn't the only way to re-embed values into economic decision making. Any religious system will do that. So I think maybe the question is not necessarily about indigenous knowledge per se. It's about enchanted, embedded cosmologies which might come from Hinduism or from Catholicism or from an earth-based spirituality and economics and economic rationality. And to some extent, in many parts of the world, including Brazil, Christianity or Islam have much more traction in that way. If you think about something about usury or you know, then because they speak to 1 billion people each more. So maybe that the conversation should be about economics and economic rationality and, you know, religious cosmologies which ground a different kind of rationality and the balance between them.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, Steve. Maybe we should explore that a little bit more. And clearly, from a planetary health point of view, the Pope's encyclical seems to be an advance in the way he is bringing that to the attention of Catholics around the world. Because one thing I would say about many religions, having been raised in New Zealand myself, my background is Ngāi Tahu, Maori and Scottish, but so I did spend some time in Presbyterian contexts, that much of what I heard and learned in that religious context was very much reflections on the way we live and guidance around human well-being in that context, but not so much about the way we live and its impact on Earth systems and what that might mean for the well-being of other species and ultimately our own well-being, as is very clear from Sam Myers and Howie Frumpkin's book that many of you contributed to. So I guess my general sense would be that in many of the more contemporary religious contexts, which I agree with you are exceptionally important in terms of the way they shape human activities, human behaviors, and critically important for large populations around the world. But not so sure that planetary consciousness comes through clearly as it might. And so it is very good, I think, to see, for example, the encyclical, but I'd be interested in what others' reflections are in that kind of context.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, Tony, as well. There's one from Corinne Reed, which says, how do we train our social science graduates to have a stronger voice in the planetary health conversation? I'd immediately respond to that by actually involving them in the Planetary Health Alliance and Planetary Health Social Science group. Once we've got the group running, it will also obviously be a good networking group for young social scientists who want to come in. But I'm sure other people and the other panelists have got some views on that as well.
Yes, would other panelists like to jump in on that one? Zoe.
Well, one of the things I would also recommend is not just joining the network to keep the conversation going, but starting a project of your own, even if you're one person. Just get involved with your local community, your local ecology, your local science. And again, going back to what Steve says, really important to know the overarching organizations and how they work so that you can actually start a conversation between those two. Do I have 2 minutes to give a case study example, Tony?
Yes, please proceed.
All right. So I had been noticing that the city council was hoovering up the leaves during autumn with all its fuel, and I'd been feeding the leaves to a compost plant, and the resulting compost was being sold back to us with all its beautiful toxins in it mixed in. So my point was, how do I actually beat them to the curb and create a community around my local area to pick up the leaves and create my own garden, my own community garden in the vicinities? It really worked, because rather than talking about ecology, I was talking about sports, outdoor sports during autumn. So people would come out and just pick up the leaves, and I would have this little cart come over, and we just pick up the leaves and end up with a rose garden, and we started growing food. But what was interesting is that Manchester City Council was wondering what we were doing, and some people asked if we were on community service or what crime we had committed for having to pick up the leaves off the street. So there was this perception as well, but it did open up the conversation between the higher powers of the city and the local initiatives that wanted a cleaner approach. And what was interesting in my particular experience is that it was not a conversation on ecology, it was a conversation on physical exercise and fun together that worked. Now, this is where you don't get maybe enough information at university, which is why you need to immerse yourself in a project of your own, because my experience will definitely not be your own, and that's what's worth sharing.
Thanks very much, Zoe. And perhaps, Corinne, I'm not sure whether you are able to put your mic on, but I think this is a very important question. And I wonder if you have any reflections from your experience with Victoria University in this context. Oh. No, perhaps feel free to join back in a moment. Would others, anyways, from the perspective of communications and marketing and engaging that very important set of disciplines in planetary health, how are you finding that in Brazil, and what are you seeing around the world in your community?
I think that we are doing here are small experiences. In general, there is a hegemony of the capitalism, the traditional forms of capitalism to communicate about how to stimulate the consumption. In my point of view of advertising, I try to show for you, for everybody, the idea that we must create communications that fetishizes, seduce the idea, the people with the idea of precepts of planetary health, because our speech about planetary health is always rational. And we must create a magical imaginary about planetary health. It's because of that I said about the movie No, because how to speak about Pinochet regimes and said no to the continuity to the regime, military regime, with a positive way, in a positive way, without to speak the problems and the situation of Chile in the military regime. So this, in the same way, we must create a linking sense of create a connection between a positive imaginary about planetary health to associate with the values of the brands. Of course, it's not just an association, because we must change all the logic of production in economy to create a sustainable production. So it is according with you are discussing now about local communities producing in local community. We have to change our ideas of consumption, but the brands must associate these values with the precepts of planetary health. And we don't do this. We have a small experience. Alex Atala, for example, other kind of trends of business in organic production we have, but it's not enough. And we must change our point of view about society and consumption. And I think advertising can contribute about this, with this, creating an imaginary positive about planetary health, not only with the speech that argues about the rationality that the capitalists create problems to our life in the planet, but there is a way for living with planetary health precepts that are good for us. These are good for us.
Yeah, no, I think this is a fascinating area, Enris. I think it's we need to pay much more attention to this in our work in planetary health. I really liked the term you used in your presentation, what I understood, making planetary health seductive, making it something that people want to engage with, to be part of. I think often in the environment discourse, it's a bit about doing without a kind of a negative connotation, but making efforts for planetary health seductive is a really interesting thing that we should explore more. Now I can see Padma has her hand up as well, and Jenny, do feel free to jump in if you see things in the chat box as well.
Yeah,
as we go along.
Many questions at the moment.
No worries. Padma, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. And Ines, that was a wonderful thought to have us look at planetary health as seductive, attractive, and addictive, probably, so that we get used to the idea of having planetary health and promoting it. But I was just reflecting back on the way things were maybe a couple of decades back, when anything organic was being promoted and it was made attractive, and advertisements were going forward for that. So how would it be different from those where it said organic or natural? So these kind of things were in vogue or in fashion. So how would we make it different from that?
I think we must valorate the local productions, but the problem is the consumption of organic food is very expensive for us. Mainly also in Brazil, because we don't have any conditions to produce large scale of organic. Of course, it's against the idea of planetary health, but to create a new imaginary about consumption, it's very difficult. I think the first thing is to show the consumption in planetary health precepts more positive, more seductive, and with an alternative to our planet. In this case, we must think in this kind of thinking, but the configuration of production is behind all those things. So we don't have how to change the productive system yet. I think the problem, how to change the productive system associated to a new kind of communication.
Yep. Thank you very much, Enuis. And I think I can see two more hands up. Three, excellent. So I think, Sam, you might have had your hand up first, then Manuela, and then back to Jenny. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's bothering me is scale and speed here. You know, I'm involved with the race to resilience or the race to zero. I mean, this is really urgent. So I like the practicality of Eunice's suggestions. So we're going to go with the market. We're in a capitalist system. Let's use marketing to drive behavioral change much more in a positive way. It's happened with reduction in smoking, certainly in our country, and we can do that in other ways. But smoking or other things has combined a regulatory approach with a market-based approach. And governments are very happy to see the market approach, but always more cautious about using the stick. So we need definitely a combination of the carrot and the stick. And I think in planetary health, we need to think that through at all times, not just rely on one part of it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sam. Very helpful comments there. Manuela?
Yes, concerning food system in Brazil, there is a lobby of agricultures who have the power of having all the processes of the food from the plantation to the sales. They are very powerful and they have a political influence. And our plantations are soil plantations, and soil plantations destroy completely the rest of the environment as a monoculture, as you know. So that's a great problem too. It's very difficult, for example, to change the way these people behave and think in Brazil, and they have a political political influence as well, which is dangerous.
Yeah, thank you very much, Manuela. And Daniela, did I see you had your hand up? Was there something that you were keen to reflect on?
Hello, I was clapping, but
oh, right, oh, sorry.
I was clapping to Sam, but yeah, I'm a journalist, so I've been studying the role of the media, the mainstream media, in pointing out direction and perspective in terms of this movement we are doing towards a low carbon society. So I think we have a very important role to play in terms of social scientists helping to signalize this perspective in terms of the direction we need to do or to follow. Yeah, and I totally agree that I've been studying about climate change communications, and we are trying to figure it out how we can make this behavior change easy, fun, and popular. So I think we need to deliver good messages, and I agree with Niels when he's speaking that we need to create new messages and try to engage people in terms of this movement. We are all as a whole world trying to move towards. So yeah.
Great. Thanks
You.
very much, Daniela. Jenny, I think you've had your hand up for a little while.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to that idea of food and the discussions of food, because it's not too surprising that's come up so strongly. But one of the other projects that I'm working on at the moment is looking at mutual aid groups during COVID. And the project very quickly coalesced around food and food banks in the UK. And one thing we realised again very quickly is that there is absolutely no shortage of food in the UK. You know, the food banks cannot get rid of it quickly enough. They are not short of donations. And yet at the same time, there are people who cannot afford to feed their family. And I think this, when we spoke then about the idea of free food, there's quite a lot of things around the cost of food that I've been interested in, which is not only, you know, how much an organic apple costs rather than a non-organic apple, or a free-range egg rather than a non-free range egg, but also the time that you have to prepare it. You know, one of the things we've realised is actually for a family to eat healthily, you essentially need either a full-time housewife or a full-time cook. If you're not just going to eat ready meals, and it is incredibly time consuming. And equally, again, as we said, in terms of the land, organic food uses up a lot more land. And so I think there is really something interesting around this food as the foundational basis for planetary health, and that actually if everybody is fed well, everything else comes from that. Because it started off in my mind thinking, you know, why is a bag of oven chips in the supermarket a quarter of the cost of the equal weight of baked potatoes? Because, you know, all of the electricity that goes into producing those, and then at home you actually need an oven, and that has, you know, the electricity costs. One of some food poverty work in the UK realised that actually some families just cannot afford the electricity it costs to bake a potato, whereas they can afford the electricity it costs to cook oven chips. So I think a real reorienting of what we're thinking about around food and how people eat, and it brings me back to that thing of not forgetting the urban poor. We cannot forget the urban poor in this, and looking at how we reorient some of those food systems to enable everybody to eat healthily, because there is no shortage of food and there is no shortage of healthy food. But the systems that we have at the moment, whether they're the societal systems or the economic systems, do not allow the distribution of that food to work in the way that it should. So we end up in a situation where we have, you know, the dual burden of malnutrition. We have children who are both stunted but obese because they're eating, you know, horribly processed and unhealthy food all the time. But how do we actually reorient that, bearing in mind the time cost with that, and actually being able to shop and to cook and to prepare and to clean up and to wash up afterwards? And I think that's, you know, that's a project for planetary health waiting to happen.
Right. Look, thanks very much, Jenny. And look, I'm conscious I can see other hands that Steve's got his hand up, but I have a responsibility as the chairperson to make sure that we finish on time, which I think I understand is in 3 minutes. What I might do is just make very brief closing remarks and throw back to Jenny, because I know she has some things to say about next steps. Steve, you might like to put a comment in the chat box if that was okay with you, just to round it out. But I guess what I would say is first that this has been a marvelous opportunity. Again, thanks to Jenny for bringing us together. And there's a lot more to discuss here. We've only just begun to open up the possibilities. As Sam has made clear, you know, political economy of planetary health is a critical area that needs much more exploration. I think a number of people have raised ethical issues that we haven't been able to explore. Politics in this context clearly important, and then questions around you know, engaging young people in these conversations. I think in some parts of the world we're seeing young people stepping back from dominant economic models, embracing different ways of making a living that are more focused not just on economic outcomes, but also on social good and positive environmental outcomes. So I think much more so than people of my generation. And so I think that this is a hopeful way to finish. But look, we could talk all day. And Jenny, you've got your hand up, but back to you to round things out with next steps.
Yeah, we had a couple of people mentioning in the chat, you know, should we have a sociologist for Planetary Health Group? That was exactly what the point of this panel is kicking off. That has already been raised to the Planetary Health Alliance. So this was just very quickly on the next steps. I think I'll get all your email addresses from the Planetary Health Alliance because you gave them when you signed in. So I'll be able to kind of keep a record and get back to you. The idea of the next steps from this was that we would do some kind of positioning paper from this panel as that kind of first step of what social science can offer to planetary health. There's a social science forum on HILO that I created at the start of the week. Hopefully you've all seen about the HILO relaunch. One of the things that I really want this group to be is a one-stop shop for finding social scientists for research consortiums. And I would urge all of you, if you're going for a multidisciplinary bid that says you need a social scientist, please engage them from the beginning of the bid. There is nothing more irritating as a social scientist than being called in at the end to say, we had to tick the box for social science, can you do it for us? You know, no, I can't, frankly, that's quite insulting. If you want us to be involved from the beginning, and you will end up with a much better project. So you said kind of awareness raising for scientists. I think one of the things with that is helping scientists to understand what social science is and what it can do. And so I've run a couple of social science for scientists workshops. We actually ran one for a week in India for some colleagues on the Indian projects that I'm working on. I've run it at Edinburgh University as part of a BBSRC cross-disciplinary call. You know, quite happy to do that for any other scientists who don't really understand what social science is but would like to know more. And finally, there's my email address. You know, please do all stay in touch and feel free to contact me. Thank you all very much for coming. As I said, it's quite scary when you have something you don't know if anybody's going to turn up. And so I'm hugely grateful to the 50 of you who did turn up for the audience, and also for our panelists who agreed to speak, some of them at not the most convenient time of the day in their part of the world. But unfortunately, with the intention to try and get a truly worldwide panel, it was always going to be a miserable time for somebody. And I thank Tony in particular, I think had the most miserable time in terms of the clock, hopefully not in chairing the session, for giving us his time today. So thank you to all of you for being part of this.
Thanks to everybody, Jenny, and thanks to you in particular for all of your work. Well done, everybody. And I can stay online, Jenny, probably for another 10 minutes or so. That'll take me up to midnight here in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
So,
I was hoping to kind of wash up with the panelists after. I'm not going to kick out anybody who would really like to stay for that, but we're kind of asking the audience if you wouldn't mind. Go off to one of the other excellent panels that are going on elsewhere in the Planetary Health Conference, and we'll just have a little wash up with the panelists. So again, thanks very much for coming, and please do all stay in touch.
Well, well done, Jenny. That was a terrific session. Marvelous presentations from all our speakers from all parts of the world. I just thought it was such a rich conversation that we had.
Thank you to everybody. They were amazing.
Thank you, Jenny.
There's some of you, particularly with projects that we're in the process of putting together at Royal Holloway, that I would like to kind of follow up with you about. Steve and Catherine, I've already emailed prior to this about the project. I'm hoping they'll get.
So we didn't get back to you this week. We're just I'm still just finishing marking things, but
yeah,
and
no pressure, no pressure.
Maybe a conversation about that would be really useful. It would be nice to connect.
Yeah. Hello again, Morgan. Did you enjoy it?
Did you have
Where's
fun?
your big fat cat? Where's your cat?
Yeah, that's nice.
Our cat is not here right now, right? He's in the basement.
He's the biggest cat I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, so just kind of for the last 10 minutes, I mean, what my intention is this has all been recorded. So I've got to download that to put it onto the Planetary Health website, but I'll also try and transcribe it. I probably won't get around to doing that till next week. And from then I'll try and shape a positioning paper. I think probably for a commentary for Lancet Planetary Health is the obvious place. And maybe as a slightly longer one for challenges as well. Those are the two obvious journals. And then from there, what would be good is I'll try and pull out some particular themes that might be things that we focus on. This is where, and I think definitely that one around traditional knowledges and medicines is something that is coming out more and more. The food is coming out more and more. And if there are any others as I go through, I'll pull those out. And then look, there seems to be, there's increasingly funding calls that look for transdisciplinary approaches and also are called planetary health in everything but name. And I think they're not only academics, again, they're increasingly looking for non-academic partners. So that is a real opportunity for some of those more action-focused groups, and certainly Zoe, some of the groups you spoke about, to actually get involved in those projects. They normally need a kind of local academic gatekeeper to reach them through, but it's not impossible certainly to bring them in. And knowing where some of those groups are and how we can easily reach them is certainly quite useful.
Could I just make a comment, Jenny?
Yeah.
Which ties to the early discussion, Tony. If you looked across the world, and I think this is certainly true in the Western world, and certainly most acutely in the Anglophone world, but certainly in Europe, and I think it's also true in places like India too. The political opposition to globalization is now disrupting the entire political spectrum. When I was in the 80s, when I was doing my undergraduate degree, we on the left in Manchester, as it happens, were all against globalization, right? And it was a left-wing thing and a green thing to be against globalization. If you look at the array of forces now, the sort of the skeptics about comparative advantage and trade and the people who are wanting to kind of bracket that off and ask questions, and now more often than not, they're on the right. They're national populists of various persuasions. So Trump is much more anti-globalist in a way than the Democrats or AOC or so the questions of open borders, all those kind of things. And I think if I asked a question, in the chat, do you need a planetary planetary consciousness in order to advance these agendas? Because quite often the process of constraint might come from completely different motivations. It might be because you're an old order Mennonite who just sees capitalism as mammon. It might be because you're Rod Dreher and you think that capitalism equals kind of pornography and a sort of consumerism. And it's, there's all sorts of motivations which might lead you to be in favor of regulation and more place-bound forms of economy. And I think in terms of traction, it would be very difficult because the entire kind of academic establishment is geared towards a sort of benign global liberalism, really, United Nations and all of that. But if you look at where the action is politically in India with Modi and the people who are willing to constrain capitalism are actually not coming from traditional places. And it may be that if one is serious about planetary health, if one's serious about embedding market forces, it might be that it's not a kind of green planetary consciousness that's going to do it. It might be more to do with a sort of place-bound localism, which is quite dangerous politically.
This is exactly why I want you in the mutual aid project, Steve.
Okay.
Because what we're seeing with, and this is a mutual aid project, we're kind of going back to mutual aid as an organising principle, is we're seeing a real value in the UK around federalism. So that how do you scale that local to the global without leaving the local behind? And it's to me, it's all, and I think it ties in very much about why Brexit was voted for in the UK, because you see and for want of a better term, the indigenous white working class seeing all of the political class looking outwards across them and ignoring them
and down on them
yeah. And if you don't look out, it's almost like charity begins at home. If you don't look after your own people, don't be surprised when they don't want you anymore. And so it is that grab for resources, and that's, it comes into some of those ideas of again the means of production and the ownership. But what we seem to be seeing in the UK is this real value in a real mutual aid cooperative model of organisation, which enables, some of those points in your goat question. It enables some of that, the taxes that go to the big infrastructure projects that are beyond the local to still happen. It allows there to be taxes and money for education. But you also don't leave that behind. You don't take it out of the local community and make them feel that they haven't got anything back for it. And so I'm really interested in looking at that across an international picture. I mean, basically what's happening.
I'm very interested in that. The last time that had traction in Britain and Europe, William Morris was best friends with Ruskin, so an sort of anarchist socialist with the conservative, and William Penty, who was the socialist, wrote the distributist sort of radical subsidiarist kind of manifesto, which was based on social Catholic teaching for the distributist league. So, and that's again where those left-right things just don't apply. And I think for me, and I'm sure, I don't know enough about India, Padma, but I suspect that there's similar kind of political complexities which wouldn't necessarily sit easily with our pre-configured kind of idea of what the political spectrum is about and where the progressive bit is, if that makes sense. Anyway, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah. So do you want a response from me, Steve?
I would be very interested. I absolutely.
Okay, so I think India is a country of contradictions is what I would like to say. And as any society, we keep swinging between communism to capitalism and somewhere in between. And all governments are there to make sure that the country is developing. And India follows the footsteps of modern development definitions. So GDP is what defines India's development as well. And if you look at the modernization of India, we have a long way to go to catch up with the modern world or the Western world. Not that is where, I mean, now you have hit a point where you want to come back and go towards planetary health. So I think it's not one or the other. It's parallelly both things happening. And in India as well, and in Modi's government as well, I feel that while there is an extreme capitalist view where promotion of manufacturing and the industry and so on is happening, at the same time, I think this is the last year, particularly because of the COVID, we have seen somewhat a rapid revitalization of traditional knowledge, which is quite surprising. There was a heavy promotion, maybe because none of us knew what to do. So there was a heavy promotion of home remedies and which we are all used to, which are using kitchen herbs and so on, which we do in our day-to-day lives. Those were promoted by the government. And I myself was part of a task force, which is called the Ayush Task Force for COVID and R&D in COVID using Ayush interventions. Ayush means Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, and homeopathy. These are traditional medicines of India. And government had funded around 136 projects to look into traditional medicine and see if there is any evidence to protect ourselves from COVID. So I think the findings will start coming out soon. So that kind of action is also in parallel going on. And the second thing which I noticed, which is quite interesting, I don't know how practical on ground it will make a difference, but there's an announcement made when about 3-4 years back that every primary healthcare center will have, will be called a wellness center, where they will be promoting wellness in terms of teaching yoga and using Ayurvedic remedies and so on, in parallel to the allopathic system of medicine, which is the mainstream system in India. So which is a completely a new direction which has been given, and we have to see how far it is going to be practical on the ground.
Thank you.
I might need to step back now, I think, unfortunately, but it's been marvelous. Really enjoyed the opportunity to be with you all, and look forward to following up, keeping the conversations going. You know, there's a lot more to do to really bring the social sciences to the heart of planetary health, which is where they certainly need to be, I think.
Yep. Thank you very much again. I've taken up far too much more of your time, but I will be back in touch with you all.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. And thanks, Jenny.
See you again.
Yeah, very good.
Bye
Yeah,
all.
take care. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you, Jenny.
Bye.
Bye, Morgan.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Morgan.
Bye.
Yeah, bye. Bye, Morgan.
Bye, 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 bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.